Welcome to the ROTH Show.
Old school job cigarette papers, they were so skinny and little. Old Bull Durham papers that came with a little sack of tobacco, which is the way that you had to buy it. The only time that you could buy cigarette papers was when you bought them with Bull Durham tobacco in the little burlap sack, and you kept the burlap sack for your coins. And this is when I was like 16, 17. We were just getting our driver's licenses. And this was the 60s, okay? This was like Haight-Ashbury time, Flower Power, Hendrix, Cream, finally Zeppelin, and all of this was happening at once. But you couldn't find cigarette papers. There was only one shop in Pasadena, which was the Free Press. It was called the Free Press and Kazoo. You could buy kazoos there because that's like the people's instrument. Anybody can play it, starting from little kids all the way up to polka bands. You can find kazoo orchestras the same way as you find steel drum orchestras, all right? You can find steel drum bands, and you can find people who can play kazoo in 9-part harmony. It's an amazing thing. I'm sure it's on the YouTube. I haven't actually looked. You could buy zigzags, or you could buy job cigarette papers. And the job cigarette papers, for some inexplicable reason, always came in licorice. And they always tasted like licorice, and they always left a little mark like that. And I don't know if I was a big fan of that, and it might have actually been chocolate now that I'm thinking about it. But the Zigzag Man, that's emblematic. That's a logo that is on par with the Nike swoosh, the American flag. It's probably a combination of both these days in terms of what it's contributing to the economy, right? The Zigzag Man. Interesting that they're both French. I just thought of that right here on the air. The Zigzag Man, job cigarette papers, they have a long history that goes back into the Victorian era, La Belle Époque, the beautiful era, you know, the times of bowler hats and horse-drawn carriages, goes all the way back. And the most economical way to smoke cigarettes, when you roll them yourself, is tiny and small. And you'll see the guys, you lick at one time, you get about 8 pulls, and then you're done. It's the most economical way for somebody to smoke cigarettes or utilize or enjoy tobacco if you have virtually no money, no cash at all. And all of your favorite authors who came out of the Belle Époque in the 1800s, all the way up through the turn of the century, everybody smoked. Nicotine does something to your brain that doesn't happen with any other kind of soda pop that you're going to ingest. Okay, that's slang for nicotine gets you thinking. That's everybody from Mark Twain to Sigmund Freud to Winston Churchill to Jack London to Kerouac to yours truly. It's endless, because something happens there with nicotine. So when we talk about tobacco, yeah, it has an upside and a very deadly and dangerous side to it. Turns out now that nicotinic acids contained in liquid form or liquefied form is considered an organic or natural fertilizer. Why? Because tobacco comes out of the dirt. That's natural. It's a plant. When you crunch it up and distill or knock out or render the nicotine, then that gets put into some aquatic or aqueous solution, and you can literally spray that on your pot plants or your strawberries or your tomatoes and say that they're organic. And this is happening frequently in the markets here. So we're kind of alternately illuminating and complaining here, but it's a tobacco product. Tobacco is a big part of the American culture, the psyche of culture that is pot, that is cool. What would jazz be without those Blue Note album covers with slow smoke growing there? There's a Coltrane, Billie Holiday. You start to talk like this and your voice kind of drifts just the same way that the smoke does. And Jimi Hendrix did not invent putting the cigarette at the end of his guitar. That came from long before with Woody Guthrie and Lead Belly and folks like that started doing that back in John Lee Hooker's time, okay? But the fellas were smart enough to borrow it from some really, really good sources. Sort of like stealing hubcaps in a better neighborhood. Is there such a thing as organic cigarette papers? Cigarette papers that can speak Spanish and make a really good espresso with a little swirl like a peace symbol on the top? Is there such a thing as safe smoke to any degree? And the answer, of course, is no fucking way. But at least I'm self-applying spit, okay? If I decide and she decides and we decide and we make an informed, semi-sober, I mean, lucid is close enough, decision, congenially, then together we'll swap spit and roll up a few. And if you're going to roll up a few, why don't you do it like individual, unless it's a friend, loved one, etc., and you have some certitude as to where that face has been in the last 90 days. I remember the days in Van Halen when we'd say after a break, the 15-minute break after every 45-minute set, you'd play 5 45-minute sets. And 15-minute break, we'd all turn to each other, and Ed would turn to me and say, let's go have a cigarette. And we all went and had one cigarette. We would pass it from one to each other like this. Smoking in the boys' room is specifically about that. Passing one cigarette and then punching the other guy and going, hey man, don't hotbox it. Tom is smiling. You know what hotboxing means. Tom is doing this. This is Hebrew for, no, I do, but I don't. But I do, but I don't. I didn't know you were Jewish. It makes sense now. I understand world peace from the idea of passing the peace pipe, and it's one world, one love, and one cough all at the same time. They used to call it the Union cough during Civil War. Everybody would wake up on the Union side, and for 4 hours, you'd hear nothing but coughing from thousands and thousands of soldiers because they all had the same cough from the same rainstorm for the last 4 days, and everybody woke up soaking wet in the mud because that's how tents worked in those days, and and you'd hear that for about 4 miles. Mom used to say my cough sounded like 4 miles of bad road and 3 tires trying to catch up. No, she really did. Hey! Part of the rights of growing up when I was a kid back in the early 60s, you had to be able to say that you French kissed a girl. I collected that one by the time I was 13 or so. You had to be able to roll a joint with one hand while riding a horse at a full gallop. I got to that one. And then I got to the point where you could ride that horse at a full gallop towards that girl and with one hand apply a condom. Okay, I can't roll a joint with one hand. You use the term Bong Water to describe anything, everybody knows what you just meant and didn't say. You take a swig of something and somebody says, what's the taste of that? That's a new drink. You say Bong Water. Everybody knows what you just didn't say. And yeah, you have a poetic license, and I'm not afraid to use it. Bong Water. No, you can't solve it by just wiping the edges of it. It's a case of, do I really know you and love you, and am I married to you, or am I about to get married to you, and or because you got to make that kind of consideration in terms of, hey, Comanche, the days they started the peace pipe was long before we found out about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, okay? I guess it's my job to complain because I really, really, really want to protect this game preserve. I love the pot world, and I use the old term pot because if you buy me a motorcycle, I want an Indian, an old one with all the original parts. Not like a lot of stars in Hollywood where plastic makes perfect and every single part is exactly like the original, but somehow better. Woo-hoo! Moonwalk, moonwalk. I'm just ruminating out loud, bar side. You want to find your way to federal, you want recreational or medicinal. Got to be very careful of the word medicine. Got to take it real serious on some levels. Otherwise, it's going to get used against us who smoke pot. And like I say, I smoke pot before breakfast. Well, not so much smoke it anymore, but it gets in there. And yeah, I recommend it to a whole generation of boomers with a sense of humor. I would have shared it with Mom when she was still lucid. She doesn't quite know, her way of things these days. So no, I'm not going to, hand her over. But hey, I would have shared it with her very early on and said, hey, try some of this. But you can't call medicine tangerine Watusi drink. I mean, I'll share that mixed drink with you after the show and swap some spit. But we're talking about medicine here, and that's a whole different kind of an issue. Hook up this? I don't know. Very difficult to clean those pipes. Like after a while, you're going to smoke a hookah and you're going to look inside those pipes. They're going to look like Grandma Betty's arteries. And some say those arteries is what sent Grandma Betty to heaven. Heaven! Now I'm making an assumption. I really want to equip myself one last time in terms of being spit-free. I am not. Don't hand me the joint. I'm not sure where your face has been. But I was you at one time in my life, and I remember mine was. Now, as far as spit-free, no, I'm not going to preach. I'm not going to teach. This is not a civics lesson. Let's go all the way back to the beginning of this, of the young lady that I met for 14 seconds. And if she said to me, David Lee, I'm going to go wash off my feet in the dark. I'm going to walk into this hotel room in the dark, and I want you to suck my toes without a second thought. I'd be down there for a fiscal year. That's right. And then later on, I'd use her belly button for exactly what the Lord intended it. That's right. I'd lick it, and I'd fill it full of salt so we'd eat popcorn and watch Netflix later after we're done. Mm-hmm. And the salt stays in. That's why you lick it. And whatever's in that belly button, I don't give a shit. Stevie Wonder, baby. Mm-hmm. Curiously enough, public service announcements today would probably include, kids, watch it. Don't swap the spit. Roll your own. Make it home alive. That's a little dramatic, but you're going to remember it.